Good morning. CGI is very honored to be here and sponsor this amazing conference. You know, the morning just started and I already feel inspired and ready to conquer the world. And as Lisa indicated, it's a great way to spend some time off work, right? So, thank you. So CGI is a global IT consulting company. We're very proud to serve local government in Los Angeles since 1984. I'm a vice president with the company, and I'm very proud to communicate that CGI is very committed to building a diverse and gender-balanced workforce. In fact, at our Los Angeles office, 42% of our workforce are women, and I'm very happy to have many of our women leaders with me here today. Beyond implementing technology, we believe that it's very important to give back to the communities we serve. So we spend a fair bit of time with various initiatives such as mentoring with the Women in Technology group at the UCLA IS Associates, also spending some time mentoring girls as part of the Beyond the Bell. And we're also partnering with 4 other offices throughout the nation to stand up a STEM camp in downtown Los Angeles. When I heard about the theme for today, Dare to Be, it reminded me of a conversation I had with my late mother. So when I was in 4th grade, I once told her, I want to be Chinese instead of Filipino. Because, you know, when you're a kid, it's so hard to explain what Filipino is. You know, nobody spells it right. You can't explain the food, you know, and all that stuff. So, you know, anyway, so she took me aside and she said, look, you know, being different is a gift. It's not a chore. Because you really can teach someone something new every single day. And with that, she taught me to believe that if you seize this opportunity, you could really contribute to this world instead of just live in it. So with that, I'm very pleased and honored to introduce Noelia Rodriguez, who provides the type of exemplary leadership we can all aspire to. Noelia is now serving as the Managing Director of Communications and Government Relations for the Port of Long Beach. She was named the Managing Director in July of 2015. She joined the nation's largest port from LA Metro, where she served as the agency's Chief Communications Executive. Previously, she was the director of the prestigious John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum at Harvard University, a premier arena for political speech and debate, where she regularly hosted world leaders, heads of state, elected officials, and believe it or not, Alec Baldwin. Noelia was recruited by Harvard to serve as a fellow in residence for the Kennedy School of Politics for the fall of 2007. She also began her communications career at the Southern California Edison. In 1994, she was drafted by Los Angeles Mayor Richard Riordan to serve as his press secretary and was later promoted to deputy mayor. In 2000, Mayor Riordan appointed Noelia to serve as the president and CEO of Los Angeles 2000, the host committee for the Democratic National Convention. First Lady Laura Bush also recruited Noelia to serve as her first White House press secretary and director of communications. Ultimately, Noelia was Ms. Bush's longest-serving White House spokesperson, and as part of the president's executive staff, she identified, initiated, and implemented media and PR strategies that elevated the First Lady's international presence, especially in the aftermath of 9/11, the terrorist attacks and the war in Afghanistan and Iraq. Although Noelia is a native Texan, she's still searching for that perfect pair of cowboy boots, preferably with the perfect cowboy in them. So please help me welcome Noelia Rodriguez.
We run the Thank you so much for that introduction, Doreen. I really appreciate that. And that last line always gets a laugh. Everybody thinks I'm joking when they say I'm looking for the perfect cowboy. I'm not really joking. I need a perfect cowboy in my life. And preferably like tonight would be great. So that's your project. Because tomorrow's my birthday, so what better way to have a birthday present, right? What better way to spend the eve of my birthday than to be with so many fabulous women. I'm so excited to be here, and I have to say a little bit nervous, because as much as I love being around powerful women, I always feel like there's this, somebody was saying earlier at our outside, like maybe I don't belong here, that maybe they're gonna be on to me, that I'm not really as fabulous as my introduction says. But you know what? I'm gonna believe it. So we're just gonna go with that for today. So from a Texas border town to the City of Angels to the White House, my life journey has been filled with a lot of dare and a measure of scare. Throughout, I've navigated a career that was awe-inspiring, sometimes disappointing, but always memorable. I want to share with you some of my experiences over my career, which is hard to believe. It's been a couple of decades now. And hopefully, you'll recognize some of the things that I'm talking about, and will inspire you to conquer your fears and call on your confidence to make a difference, not only in your career, but more importantly in your personal life. Because really, as the time has gone by, I think more about my personal life than I do about my career. Not that I'm not dedicated to my career, but your values change over time, and I think that's something that I really feel very proud of for myself, that I'm making that recognition. So I'm happy to be here. And my title today is Dare to be Bold, Dare to be Brave, Dare to be Brilliant. That's my title. But really, it's a mantra. My mantra, your mantra, our mantra. Because if you don't do those things, you're not going to reach your full potential. And at the end of your life, you're not going to be able to look back with pride. And knowing all of you, I know you're going to look back at your lives with pride, no matter what you chose to do in your careers and in your personal lives. I'd like to thank the Women's Leadership Conference for inviting me here today, and thank you, Doreen, for that introduction. I also want to thank, I'm not sure if she's here, but Long Beach Council member Stacy Mungo. She was the one who recommended me to today's conference, and she's a great leader and a great supporter of women in the city of Long Beach. So I've been really fortunate to have worked with her over the last year or so. And of course, behind the scenes, Ivy Long and Vanessa Olivas, who have helped get me to where I am at this moment for this conference. But I also want to say a special note of recognition, and I think it might have been brought up earlier. What a fabulous, interesting, scary week it has been since the election. But the one thing that I think all of us in this room and beyond can be very proud of, it's the fact that soon 4 of the 5 county supervisors will be women. Wow, chicks rule in the county of LA. So amazing to have that history and to have the Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors be such trailblazers, not only in Los Angeles, but throughout the country and indeed the world. I've thought a lot about what I wanted to talk to you about today, and when I was talking to the organizers about what do you think the women in the room will want to hear about? And of course, it's always about the White House, which is important and fun, and I'm very proud to be an alumni of a very small club. But there are also things that have happened along my journey that I think are important for you to know about me, because I think that it's probably not, my life is probably not much different than most women's lives, certainly many of the women here in LA County. Am I brilliant? I can be. Am I bold? Often. Am I brave? Yes. Standing here today is a testament to me being brave. But you know what? Being brave sounds easy, but rarely is easy simple. My story is a humble one. I was born in Brownsville, Texas, which is a border town along the Mexican border at the end of the Rio Grande before it dumps into the Gulf of Mexico. I did not learn English until I went to school. Spanish was my first language. My parents, fortunately, had the foresight to move us from Brownsville to Los Angeles just in time for me to start kindergarten. And I remember feeling so out of place when I started school because I didn't know what everybody was talking about. The language was so hard for me to understand. But I was the responsible number one child. My job was to come home and teach my brother and my sister how to speak English, which is a pretty heavy responsibility when you're just 5 years old. But I do remember feeling different. I always have that memory in my thoughts and in my heart that I was always different. I was always an outsider. And I think as devastating as that felt when I was 5, over the span of my life, it actually has been an asset because it helped me be comfortable with being uncomfortable. And that's something that I often tell women, especially young women and men. But there are a few uncomfortable men in the room today, I'm sure, but be comfortable with being uncomfortable. And so going through school, we ended up, Linda mentioned Rosemead earlier. I actually grew up in Rosemead. Ultimately, that's where we moved. And I went to high school at Mark Keppel High School. And I was a very obedient, authority, respectful young woman, and I knew, though, that I wanted to go to college, but I had no idea what that meant, what that looked like, how to do it, how to pay for it, and all those things. Nobody in my family had ever done it. So one day when I was a freshman, I mustered the courage to make an appointment to see my counselor to ask him about preparing for college. And I remember sitting across the desk from him, and he's looking at my file, I think. I'm sitting there, and he looks at me and he says, "College is not for you. You need to take typing and shorthand so you can be a secretary and get a job after high school." So I'm hearing a couple of groans in the room. So that's what I did. I took typing and shorthand to be a secretary when I got out of high school. But guess what? I have still the record for Mark Keppel High School for shorthand. I could still take shorthand at 120 words a minute. Mostly because they don't teach shorthand anymore. But I tell you, I still, to this day, use shorthand in my daily life. It's much faster than writing, and I don't always have my phone with me. So I'm really proud of that accomplishment. But lesson number 1, after I finished high school, I got a job as a secretary thanks to my connection to my shorthand and typing teacher, Mrs. Barbara Nix. She helped me understand the concept of networking. A previous student had graduated and had gone to Security Pacific National Bank and worked in personnel, is what it was called at that time. And Mrs. Nix connected me with Marion Hess. It's amazing that you remember all these names all these years later. And that's how I got a job, through networking. And I always remember that, the importance of helping other people, and I've done that throughout my life. So I remember when I went to work at Edison, I'd been there for a few years, and this same counselor was one day I encountered him in the cafeteria, and of course he didn't remember me, but I remembered him. He was doing some meeting there with some office of the Edison company. And I went up to him and I introduced myself, and I, at that point, had already become a corporate communications professional. And I told him. I didn't tell him, of course, what a kind of a guy he was all those years before, but I thanked him for inspiring me to continue with my education. My education, of course, being typing and shorthand, because that's how I got a job at Southern California Edison. So all of these things were playing in my universe. And so I was at Edison, and then I got a job working for Mayor Reardon. Now, I'm shorthanding a lot here, but what I'm not telling you is that I didn't go to college until after, I was already working as a secretary. I went to school at night while working full-time, and I ultimately graduated from Cal State Los Angeles while working full-time at Southern California Edison. Now, I'm proud alum. What was hard about that for me, not so much the work of getting the education, but while I was studying, I was in the clerical ranks. And then once I had that piece of paper that said I'm officially smart, and I had the confidence to go after my goals at the Edison company, because I loved working for the company, I got promoted. And I was in a junior level, junior executive. And it was so hard to be accepted by the people who were in the management ranks, because they saw me as this person. And then there was some resentment from these people because they saw me as selling out. And I had a very difficult time with that. And I remember I had a mentor at the time, and who was still my mentor, Don Sedan. He helped me get through all of that and helped me to not listen to that clutter, not listen to that noise, but to focus on myself in advancing my career and being respectful with both sides so that I never forgot where I came from, but I also had a vision of where I was going. Now, that's another lesson, the importance of having a mentor. In those days, it would have been great to have a mentor who looked like me to help me understand the politics of getting ahead in business and at work, but I didn't have that opportunity. My mentor was a middle-aged white guy, and to this day, 30 years later, he's still my mentor. When I have a major decision to make, I call Don Sedan and I ask him what he thinks, because he knows where I came from, he knows what makes me tick, he knows my weaknesses, and he knows my strengths. So how fortunate am I? But on the other side of that equation, I have been a mentor to so many young women, not so young women, and more importantly to men as well, especially young men. I certainly had that experience at the mayor's office, at Harvard, and at the White House. And I'll tell you my next story about the impact as a role model for others. So one day, in 2003, I was working at the White House, and I was invited to speak at Georgetown University at the end of the school year, and they have a special program for incoming freshmen, and at the end of their first year at Georgetown, they have an achievement ceremony to help, boost them and congratulate them on their accomplishments during their first year. Now, these are students who probably, some people might consider them at risk. I actually think of them as high potential. They just never had the opportunity to show their high potential. So I go and I speak to these students. At the end of the program, I get applause, applause, applause. You're at the White House, you're a celebrity, everybody thinks you're fabulous when you're at the White House. And so at the end of the program, there's a line of students who come up and they want to shake my hand, take a picture, introduce themselves and all that. This young man waits his turn and he introduces himself to me. He shows me a picture of me and him that was taken about 8 years before, and he says to me, "You are the reason I'm at Georgetown University." I'm like, okay. I have no memory of this young man. His name is Octavio Gonzalez. And I said, "Octavio, tell me when did we meet?" Because he has this picture and I just don't have any memory of the photo. That's one thing about getting older. But he says to me, when I was in East LA, I can't remember the name of the junior high school, they had an assignment to go to City Hall. The teacher gave them an assignment to go to City Hall and meet an elected official, ask them about what their job is all about, so you could learn about government. And I thought, wow, what a great teacher. I wish I'd had a teacher like that when I was in junior high school. So Octavio tells me in great detail that he came to City Hall, he was gonna meet the mayor, not gonna wait for a council member. He was going straight to the top and meet the mayor. And he says he brought his little brother with him. No memory of this. So I said, okay. And so he says, when I asked the security guard about meeting the mayor, he says, "You can't see the mayor, go see Noelia." So he took Octavio into my office. I apparently had this great conversation with Octavio. He's telling me about his reason for being there. And I know the mayor's down the hall. So I said, "Give me a minute," dial the phone, because this was the early, this was like, we still had dial phones at City Hall. And I called the mayor's secretary and I said, I want to bring this young man over. I took him over, he met the mayor, and the mayor spent about 20 minutes with him. And Octavio says to me, because of that, I decided I was going to go to college, and here I am at Georgetown. So the lesson there is, you never know. We're being watched. We're role models, even when we don't realize we're role models. I sometimes think about all the other people that I've met along the way that I have no idea what their life's journey has ended up like, and I had some small part of it. But Octavio, how proud am I to have had that influence in him. And flash forward about 5 years ago, Octavio shows up at my door at Harvard University when I was at the JFK Junior Forum. He reintroduces himself. He had, since Georgetown, came back to California, and then he went to Harvard, and he was in the master's program there. And I felt really proud that I had something to do with that. Just a little story, but I think it captures where we all are. So, when I went to work at the mayor's office, I was stunned that I was selected. I had never been in politics, but I had a great career at Edison. I was a corporate spokesperson, so somebody at the mayor's office had seen me on television, and they thought I should go and meet the mayor. I had no interest in working in public service, none whatsoever. I liked my job at the Edison Company. I had a great expense account. I had a great gig. I was very popular. I was the bomb. And I didn't want to let that go. So this person who called me about this possibility, she says, "No, you don't understand. This could be really big." I said, "Okay." So I show up at the mayor's office, and I meet with somebody who was the director of communications. And after I met with him, I knew I did not want to work at the mayor's office. It was a disaster meeting. But something happened about a week and a half later. It was the 1994 Northridge earthquake. And that was, at that point, the largest natural disaster in the history of the United States. And so I love crisis communications. Call me sick, but I love it. I'm really good at it. I can keep my cool when everybody else is running around with their hair on fire. So I offered to volunteer. They were too busy to call me back. Flash forward a couple of weeks, I get a phone call. They asked me to come in. 2 days later, they asked me to meet the mayor. That afternoon, they offered me the job. And so when I gave my notice at the Edison Company, I cried. I told my boss what I was doing, and then I started crying because I knew I was making a mistake here, but here, I thought, oh my gosh, this is the best thing that could ever happen to me, but I wasn't comfortable with that yet. So I went to work at City Hall, and it was obviously a crazy place because they were recovering from a disaster. And it soon became apparent to me that I had bitten off way more than I could chew. I would go home and cry at night because I felt overwhelmed. I felt like I didn't belong. I was an outsider. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't even know what a press secretary was supposed to do. But somebody had faith in me, and I sat down with her, and we charted a course of action, and I ultimately succeeded. And I think at the end of the day, I came to the realization the mayor had never been an elected official before. He didn't know what he was doing. I didn't know what I was doing, so together we made a great team because we learned as we went. Unlike my friend Linda, who, by the way, I want to say about Linda Griego, talk about a role model. I always have been a fan of hers, and she knows this. She was the first Mexican-American woman deputy mayor in the city of Los Angeles, and I was the second, and so I'm so proud to be in company with Linda Griego. What she didn't tell you when she was telling her story, when she ran for mayor, I think there were like 15 men that you ran against, and I just remember that so vividly. I didn't even know her, but I just remember that she was so bold. Talk about daring to be. Linda Griego was daring to be and has dared to be ever since. But back to me. So when I was working with the mayor, we got things done, and it was hard, and it was different, and it was exciting, and every week was a crisis, but I loved it, absolutely loved it. There was a turning point where I went from comfortable to, I can do this. So yeah, I was doing it. And then I became a deputy mayor, which is also very cool. And then in early 2000, when the Democratic Convention was coming to Los Angeles, which was, by the way, the first time a Democratic convention or any political convention was in LA since 1960 when President Kennedy was nominated, the mayor wanted me to be the CEO of the host committee. And I gotta tell you, ordinarily, if I had been a man, I would have said, sign me up, I'm there, when do I start? Not me. I was like, no, I like it where I am. I like playing in this pool over here. That's a lot. There are a lot of snakes in that jungle over there. I'm not interested. I didn't have the confidence, and of course, I was being silly, because you don't ever say no to the mayor. And fortunately, for me, he kept insisting, and so I ended up being the president and CEO of the host committee. And I have to tell you, it was at once the most exhilarating and the most lonely experience of my life. Exhilarating because we were making history and we were having the opportunity to showcase all of the work that we had done at City Hall to recover from the recession and the earthquake and floods and famine and fires and all of those things, and putting Los Angeles back on the map. But lonely because of all of the decisions that every day, a decision I had to make, I knew was going to tick off somebody. And so, oh well, somebody had to do it. It ended up being me, and I, at the end of the day, loved that job. So as a result of that job, I gained the confidence to actually own my own destiny. And so I got a phone call from after the election in 2000, which, unlike last week's election, it took a little while for the results after the Supreme Court decision. So in December of 2000, I got a call from the transition team for President Bush's team asking me if I would want to be considered to be Laura's press secretary. And my friend who called me, who had had my job for Barbara Bush, I said, Anna, I'm a Democrat, and I've been a lifelong Democrat. I live in this state called California, which really didn't support President-elect Bush. And I just finished working on this little project called the Democratic National Convention. What part of that do you think is going to appeal to the Bushes? And Anna says, Laura Bush is going to love it. So I said, sign me up, I'll go. So I went to Austin right after the holidays, and I had an interview with Laura Bush for 45 minutes. I actually met the president first, then Laura. And at the end of the meeting, she offered me the job. And I thought, this cannot be how people get jobs at the White House. But I'm going with it, because when the White House calls, you're not going to say no. Well, maybe this next White House, but I don't know. So it was pretty cool, but again, I was an outsider. Didn't work on the campaign, not a Republican, although I was born in Texas, didn't have any connection to the people that were there. And I felt like an outsider, I really did. But I thought that was a great asset, and I think that's what Laura believed as well, because I had views that everybody in this little insular group that came transplanted from Texas to DC, I thought differently than everybody else. So I always thought that's my greatest asset. I think differently than everybody else, and more importantly, I'm willing to speak up and say things differently than everybody else. And of course, the most prominent experience of that administration, and certainly the first year, were the terrorist attacks of 9/11. So talk about being at the center of the storm. Unlike for President Bush, he was in Florida speaking to a classroom of students, as we all know, but that was going to be a big news day for Mrs. Bush, because she was going to testify before Senator Kennedy's committee on education, and Senator Clinton was a member of that committee, and it was going to be the first time that Laura and Hillary were going to be in the same room since the inauguration. So I was ready for a big news day. Little did we know how big the news day was going to be. And I'm not going to go into great detail unless you want me to during Q&A, but that experience, I think, really, as horrible as it was, solidified our unity as a nation. And I will forever and ever remember that spirit of unity that we had, because we've lost it. And I'm not hopeful, even though there's part of me that hopes that we will have it again one day, but it's really difficult for me to see it. And I don't mean to be a Debbie Downer, but I think for us to turn it all around, it has to start with every one of us here, and to demand more of our elected officials, and to demand more of ourselves. In the aftermath of 9/11, I remembered this last Sunday because I was watching 60 Minutes, and Leslie Stahl was interviewing President-elect Trump and his family. Now, in the aftermath of 9/11, every news media in the world wanted to interview the president and Mrs. Bush, and 60 Minutes called. Now, as a professional communicator, you know that when 60 Minutes calls, it's not going to be a good day. Just not going to be a good day. But this was the exception. And so Leslie Stahl wanted to interview Laura Bush, a week after the attacks. So I made an executive decision with Mrs. Bush, and I said, you need to do this. This is important. It's an opportunity for you to comfort the nation's children, especially. So we agreed to it. So as Mrs. Bush is getting ready for the interview, and Leslie was coming down from New York by train because there were still no flights. All the planes, the airline system was just not working for obvious reasons. So Leslie was coming down to DC from New York by train. As I'm in the residence briefing Mrs. Bush on her interview, the president comes in and he starts very sternly complaining to me that Laura is going to do this interview. And he starts grilling me right in front of her. Why is she doing this? What if they ask her about weapons of mass destruction? What if they ask her about the Taliban? What if they ask her this, that, and the other? And I stood there. I wanted to say, I know what I'm doing. I got it. But I didn't. I just listened. And she literally put her hand on my arm because I think she thought I was going to either, pass out or hit him. And she didn't say anything. And I said, Mr. President, Mrs. Bush will be able to handle this. We've got it. She's going to make you proud. Don't worry. Everything will be okay. Trust me. And he said, okay, and then, when he's saying something and he's walking out the room. So I tell Mrs. Bush, this is what we're going to do, and this is your pivot message, and how we're going to role play and all that kind of stuff. I go from the residence. I literally run back to my office in the East Wing, and I call Leslie Stahl on the phone, and I said, Leslie, I've never met you, but me to you, you to me. You're not going to ask Mrs. Bush about weapons of mass destruction, are you? Because I needed to just have that comfort. And she says, oh, no, we're going to talk about, And of course, that was never the story. The story was about the aftermath and the sentiment of the nation. So Leslie was great, and the interview went very well. I was proud. Mrs. Bush was proud. And as a result of that interview and all the ones that came afterwards, Mrs. Bush got the moniker of Comforter-in-Chief after 9/11. And at the end of the day, she was the most popular Republican in the Bush administration when they left office. And I had a little bit to do with that. Very, very proud of it. So I could go on with some more stories, but I really want to hear some of the questions that you have. But I want to leave you with something that I came across last night as I was getting ready for this morning. Something that my friends know is that I am an avid collector of greeting cards. I think if I had artistic talent, that's probably what I would do, and maybe I will do it still. And I would have my own line of greeting cards because I love old school communicating and writing and seeing a stamped envelope with my name on it. So I came across this greeting card that I think really captures for us women, and really for anybody, the values and the philosophy that I think that we can live our lives every single day. And it goes like this: do the things you used to talk about doing but never did. Know when to let go and when to hold on really tight. Stop rushing. Don't be intimidated, and say it like it is. Stop apologizing all the time. Learn to say no so that your yes has oomph. Spend time with friends who lift you up and cut loose those who bring you down. Life is just too short. Stop giving your power away. Be more concerned with being interested than being interesting. Be old enough to appreciate your freedom and young enough to enjoy it. Finally, know who you really are. And I'll add, dare to be brave, dare to be bold, dare to be brilliant. Thank you for your time this morning. So I think we have some questions.
Thank you, Noelia Rodriguez. Your experiences and everything have been so amazing and inspiring to all of us. The first question is, do you feel that being a woman of color influenced your career path, and how so?
Do I feel being a woman of color influenced my career path? Was that the question?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, and not always in a positive way. People have biases. We all have them, but some people have them on steroids. And those biases, especially, when you're starting out, and certainly when I was starting out, I felt them all the time. And I remember when I was at Southern California Edison, one of the things that I created when I joined corporate communications was I worked with the director of comm, and we created a multi-ethnic speakers bureau. Now, we're all familiar with speakers bureaus. And so there was the regular speakers bureau where they'd go out and employees would go out and talk to businesses and community groups about the Edison company. But there was a target audience that was completely being missed by the company, so we created a multi-ethnic speakers bureau and employees who spoke Spanish, Spanish, Vietnamese, Chinese, and I can't remember what the other language was, to be able to represent the Edison company. So we created this, and then the director says to me, you should be on the multi-ethnic speakers bureau. And I said, no. I want to be on the general speakers bureau because I want the people in the company to know that people who look like me are at the Edison company and making a difference at the Edison company. And I felt like that was a real powerful message for me to deliver, not only internally, but externally. Because while the multi-ethnic bureau was so valuable and needed at the company, it was important for me to say that people like me need to have a voice at the board meetings that you send employees to, because that's where the influence really lies. And so, I could go on with a number of other stories, some of them not so positive, but the thing is that I think, as Linda said earlier, if you keep focusing on things that maybe set you different, that might be interpreted as complaining, that's not the way to do it. You should do it with pride, act like you belong, have your, Wonder Woman pose and say, hey, I'm here, deal with it. And that's what I think is important for us to remember. Don't let it get you down, but have it be something that you are proud of and other people will value because you value it. Next question. Where's that? Where is the voice
question.
of God coming from, by the way? Who is asking the question?
We're in the back of the room here.
In the back.
Okay. Okay, there you are.
Okay, this is a Twitter question. How much of your career was planned and how much was stumbled upon?
How much of my career was planned and how much was stumbled upon? Probably 10% planned, 90% stumbled upon, something like that. And I think that's fun. I think that to me says that I was open to opportunities, willing to take risks. That's one of the things that I learned early on from Dick Reardon. You have to be willing to make mistakes because that's part of life. And learn from those mistakes because it makes you a better person, and it opens you up to other opportunities that you never would have expected for yourself. I certainly stumbled on a lot of my career. I never applied for a job at the White House. I didn't apply for a job at City Hall. I did go after my education, and I did go after opportunities at the Edison company. I think at Edison was really where I thought about things that I wanted to do and charted a course of action to reach those goals, and I reached them and actually exceeded them. So I was always very proud of that. But the other downside, when I was listening to Linda, I'm so proud of all of the things that she's done, and she's got the corporate board representation and all of the business ventures that she's embarked on. That's just so inspiring to me because I'm thinking, there is room still for me to grow. And I look forward to stumbling into some great opportunities in the future because it's been fun, and it certainly has been the secret to my success, not being afraid to stumble into something different.
Good morning, Noelia. The next question is, how can women in search of mentors find them?
Great question. So, one of the things that we like to do as women, certainly I know Linda probably would agree with this, and so many of the other women on the program today, all you have to do is ask us. I love talking about myself. Totally love it. I'm really, I can be a pretty interesting topic. I can be pretty dull at times, I own that too, but don't be intimidated. Don't be afraid. And just remember, we all started like you did. I wish that when I was starting out in my career, that there had been the Women's Leadership Conference to be a part of. There were other things, of course, and I took advantage of those things. But even sitting around your table now, you better have one of everybody else's business cards before you leave from your table today. And then go to another table later on and get some more business cards. And then don't just put them in your whatever camp card, or database. Actually call somebody and say, you know what, I'd like to have coffee with you, or let's have lunch, or I'm working on this project and I heard you speak about it and I'm having some problems with it and kind of thinking about maybe I need some help and guidance, or I heard that you were having a problem with something. Can I offer my advice? How can I be of help? What do you think? 4 very powerful words. That will get you in the door, I think, every time. And don't get hung up on having a mentor who necessarily looks like you or who had a similar path as yours, because we can learn something from everybody, and especially people who had a different experience than we did. Certainly that was my experience with my mentor, Don Sedan, who is, that middle-aged white guy. I was talking to him recently about 2 or 3 months ago, and I said, Don, I am now older than you were when we first met. That makes me really scared. I'm scared about being older than you were. But I hope that answers the question. The thing is, go for it. Don't wonder, don't overthink it. Don't think you're gonna ask the wrong question or make a fool of yourself or embarrass yourself, because you know what, we've all done that. So you're human, just go for it. Don't be afraid, dare.
Thank you. Our last question is, what was the workplace environment like in the White House?
That's a great question. Well, first of all, I remember the first day, which was January 21st when we went to work. And everybody, the average, most of the White House staffers are very young. So I was, not as young. So they were all excited about, looking at artifacts and all that kind of stuff. Not me, I was looking for the real estate. Where was the office that I was going to occupy? And so I went and planted my bag in this really cool office, and so I had a view of the White House. I was in the East Wing, and so I had a view of the east side of the White House and overlooking the South Lawn. So in the early days, it was cool, and I say the early days meaning before 9/11, because you'd walk in and everybody, it was just such a great energy and great spirit and really terrific camaraderie. And you're proud. Every single day you walk into the White House, you're proud to be an American, because you have this singular responsibility to do good on behalf of the American people. And so my favorite part of the White House was, well, one thing you get used to is your pictures are always being taken, which I think you've seen some of my photos, and you get used to not remembering that there's a photographer always taking photos of you. So you kind of get comfortable with that. But my favorite part of the White House was when we would travel. So I got to travel around the world on Air Force One. And the coolest thing is, you bring your suitcases to your office, somebody picks up your suitcases, takes them to Andrews Air Force Base, loads them on the airplane. You never see your suitcase again until you get to your hotel room and it's waiting for you. That's really cool, really, really cool. And I remember one time we were flying across, the Atlantic, I don't remember where we were going, and I had left something in my suitcase. So it's a 747, and I told the steward I'd left something in my suitcase that I need for the first stop when we get to wherever we were going. And he says, all right, follow me. So he literally took me into the downstairs of the luggage area Air Force One, and I'm going through my suitcase while we're in mid-flight, getting whatever I needed. That's also pretty cool. And when you get on Air Force One, you have assigned seating, and it's not like, you know, your average airline seat. They're like nice recliner seats that you can sleep in if you need to, and you have your name assigned on every single one. And there are bowls of candy everywhere, and there's the mess, which is the military. They operate the kitchen. I mean, we all put on a lot of weight in that first year because you're not having like airline food, let me tell you. You're getting really great meals. Now, you pay for those really great meals. At the end of the month, you get a bill from the mess telling you, this is how much you ate, so now send us a check. So that's okay. We could live with that. And there were so many other things. Just being a part of history was the best part. The seriousness of 9/11, the beauty of the White House, the changing of the seasons, the being a part of something that was bigger than yourself was so awe-inspiring to me. And then, of course, this vivid image that I have from 9/11, because we left to go to the Hill to be with Senator Kennedy. Then we went to a secure location, which later we can tell everybody it was the Secret Service headquarters in an nondescript building in downtown DC. But when we came back to the White House that night to get our things, there was a whole row of baby strollers outside the East Wing of the White House, because it was a Tuesday and there were tours that day. And so there were literally tourists in the White House when the attacks happened, and people were told to run. And this is the evacuation plan for the White House. This is what happened on 9/11. I was on the Hill with Mrs. Bush, so I was always safe and secure. Our colleagues who were back at the White House, this is what happened. They're in their offices, the uniformed Secret Service officers run up and down the halls and yell at everybody, run for your lives, take off your shoes to the women, and run for your lives. That was the evacuation plan. There had not been an evacuation. Why would you need an evacuation plan for the White House? There is one now, but there wasn't back then. But all of these tourists, they had to run for their lives. And I just remember they could not go back and get those baby. I have this image of baby carriages on 9/11 outside the East Wing of the White House, which is where my office was. The things that you remember. One little thing I do want to say, which is kind of telling a good advice for now with everything that's happening. About 2 weeks or so after the attacks, we went to Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Mrs. Bush met with the family members of the people who were who crashed in Shanksville on United Flight 93. And when we went there, we had a local newspaper, and there was a little girl who was quoted in the paper, and she said about the terrorists, maybe if we told them our names, they wouldn't hate us. And I always remember that, and that's a great piece of advice for now. There's so much division in our country. There's so much that divides us. But if maybe we just tell the people that are on the opposite side our names, maybe they'll like us and we'll like them. That's a first step to be able to get to a place of unity again, I hope. I hope for all of us. Thank you for your time.
It's